Hello and welcome to our Masterclass workshop, demo, showcase, whatever you want to call it, with Nick, friend of mine in Barcelona. He is going to talk you through his Claude Obsidian personal OS system. There may be more tools in that stack. I don't actually know, but he's talked about it enough to me, and I think to other people. And so I am very excited to share it with the community, and I hope you are. I know there's some second brain memory management nerds in the community as well. I'm sure the claws or other agents are very hungry to see what might be in store. So, Nick, if you please introduce yourself rather than me going into the details and then
Yeah,
crack on.
thanks for having me. Just to check, you can hear me okay? Cool. I'm at a slightly unexpected venue to where I thought I'd be. So I'm Nick. For the last couple of years, I've been building my own business, my one-person consulting and training company, and having to do a lot of different things. Partly because I have different clients. I'm not just working with one client at any given moment. I run my own community with meetups in two different cities and online webinars. I do lots of LinkedIn posting and I write articles on Substack. And I'm not saying all of this to brag in a way, it's just to give you a bit of an idea of the fact that I've got a lot of different stuff to do. And also, now that I'm self-employed, I don't have a manager or even employees to help me keep accountable, to be like, hey, you said you were going to do this by the end of the week. What's happening? And very often I have to deal with wake up one day, check my calendar, realize that there's a workshop happening later that day that I'd forgotten to finish the prep for, and now I need to scramble and get it all done. Usually it doesn't happen the same day, but there's been days where it's happened like that. And also because, especially since the start of this year, business is going well, there's just a lot to do. So what I'm going to show you today is the kind of, I don't even know what to call it, the tool or the AI chief of staff I've accidentally ended up building for myself while being super busy. That's helped me get through the last few months. I genuinely would not have been able to, I would have had to either drop some of my clients or lose even more sleep to get it going. And I'm very excited to show you all how it's come together. I want to, before I start kind of screen sharing and show a little bit of what it is, I want to talk about what the system used to be. I've been using ChatGPT and Claude kind of since the beginning, adopted things like Claude projects and ChatGPT projects early on. Eugenio, can you go on mute, please? Thanks. And I was a big fan of, for example, things like custom instructions when they first came out, because it meant you didn't have to repeat yourself over and over in terms of who am I? What do I do? What am I working on? And then when projects came out, suddenly it meant I could have a project for client A, meaning I can put all my transcripts there for client A, context about client A. And then when I need to do something for client B, ChatGPT wouldn't get confused about putting information about client A into the thing with client B. But my ADHD brain really did not like working that way. Why? I'll show you an example, not by showing you a client project, but more the project I'd made for LinkedIn posts, for example. So let's see if this works. Can you all see my screen? Yeah. So I have a custom project called LinkedIn Data Product Management Posts, where I've put some information in memory and some instructions about my style. I uploaded these examples of past posts that I made that I quite liked. So I could basically be like, hey, I want you to keep in mind that this is how I write, this is how I use hooks and CTAs at the end. And basically, whenever I'd get an idea, I would start a new chat. Partly because sometimes I'd be on a walk, I'd have an idea, and I'd be like, let's throw this in. Other times it would be, hey, I've got a draft, let's iterate on it, right? I was like, oh, I came across this article about how Netflix manages data as a product, and then we iterated on it. Then I was like, oh, maybe we add an infographic. I've got some other ideas, blah, blah. The problem is, and I'm giving this example just because it's one that I can share freely without any confidential information, but imagine often there'd be other either client things or I have a course, for example, often, and there's a project for that course where I'd have ideas, oh, we can add this module, or I think I should change that module. The problem is, those don't necessarily all get done in the same session, right? I'd go on a walk, I'd have the idea about how being a difficult data team to work with often creates more value. And maybe we'd iterate on that idea with Claude, but then I wouldn't necessarily get it finished, right? I'd be like, okay, now I have a meeting. I need to go and do that meeting. And then I would usually forget about this chat ever existing. And so it made task management and task tracking very hard because there's different tasks, in other words, different chats inside Claude that I'm like, was this finished? Did I post the idea about saying no through trade-offs? I don't remember. Claude doesn't know inside the project because it's not connected to my LinkedIn. And the best I could come up with as a solution was to go and manually click rename and add a little green tick emoji. When this was done, I posted about AI eating software, whereas the async work paradox is still in progress, right? But obviously, just like any other kind of manually updating information, sure, at some point I added the construction sign emoji to this chat, but maybe I actually have posted the post since and I didn't go back to update it. It's the same as like why every CRM in every company kind of sucks because salespeople don't want to update it. And for my one person business, I wasn't updating my Notion CRM either, except during the weeks that were super quiet and I had nothing to do and I would procrastinate through it. Right. So I'm sharing all of this to give you a bit of a picture of the challenges I was dealing with, even as a heavy Claude and ChatGPT user, not so much with, oh, the prompt isn't good, the quality of the model isn't good enough, but more all the management overhead around it. The other thing to say is, for example, here I showed you how I uploaded these markdown files that each of them was basically me taking a post I put on LinkedIn and showing what it was, or a different article. But the problem is, I did that once when I created this Claude project. I've not gone back since every time I post a really good post to go, oh, I really like this other post I made. Here, have another example, right? Because again, that curation of context is manual. The last thing that's very manual and basically impossible is cross-sharing context between projects. Because actually, the context that exists for me to write LinkedIn posts and the context that exists for me to write Substack articles and the context that may exist with different, I guess that link doesn't work anymore, and the context I may have for specific client projects, it overlaps, right? There might be a lesson learned from a client conversation that I also want to apply to my LinkedIn post. When you have static projects, that doesn't happen. And that's why I was very excited to move to Claude Code because I knew I could have all my context in one place in the form of local markdown files. So for anyone that's not yet come across it, what Claude Code for me basically does is instead of having your projects inside those silos, is instead you just have a folder on your computer. So if I go here, I've got a folder called Vault version 4. Don't ask why that's what it's called. And there's folders in it and what's called markdown files, right? So I've made a markdown node, for example, with affiliate links, right? If you look at it, it's basically just very machine readable text. It looks ugly when I look at it in this plain way, but if I were to open affiliate links.md in Obsidian, it looks nicer, right? Instead of two hashtags, it just makes this font bigger because it's a header. If there's a hyperlink, I can click on this and it's going to open a Chrome tab with it. Obsidian is basically a note-taking app, right? It's like your Evernote, Apple Notes, that sort of thing, except the format of the text is not proprietary, right? Google Keep keeps all the text in a Google Keep type format. And if you want to export all your Google Keep or all your Apple Notes, it's a whole process. With Obsidian, it basically just sits on top of this folder. And so whatever note there exists here, Obsidian can read and render in this slightly more aesthetic way that you saw. That means if Obsidian goes bankrupt tomorrow, or if I decide to switch away from Obsidian, all my stuff is still there. This is why I've been using Obsidian since 2020. But now with LLMs, there's a whole other set of reasons why Obsidian is awesome, which is that AI really loves Markdown. Markdown is really easy for it to read and understand in a way that a Google Doc or a Word document is a bit harder. It eats up more tokens, or if it's a PDF, it might read it in the wrong way, or at least you need to use one of the more expensive models to read it well. So that's why I use Obsidian. But Obsidian for me is basically my front end for all the notes that just sit here in my vault. They sync to my phone. If I want to take a whole folder and share it with someone else, I can do it. They don't need to use the same software. So what have I actually built? I've used Claude Code, first of all, to keep all this stuff up to date. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But very importantly, I've basically, I've not handed over every bit of information about me to Claude. Like, it doesn't access my bank accounts, it doesn't access a lot of my Google Drive folders, but it has a lot of information about my day to day. It's got a folder called tasks, where every time there's oh, and by the way, everything I'm sharing now is like a demo version of my real vault. The real version is over here. I asked Claude, hey, can we just recreate a small sample of what I've got so I can easily share my screen and not stress that this is going to go on YouTube. So whatever you're seeing here is made up stuff. So don't look too carefully, or at least it's not, there's no company called Meridian, at least that I have spoken to. There's a folder called tasks, for example, that has actual tasks, which actually this one is real. It's tomorrow, but I do have a dental appointment tomorrow, right? So Claude, I may have mentioned to Claude that I've got this appointment coming up and it's going to add it as a task. And maybe dentist is not a very interesting one, but let's say I've got a follow-up with Tristan Walker that I met on the 6th of May, right? It's got a little bit of information of who it is. It's got metadata, like what is the status? I need to do it. What's the priority? It's high. It's a type of follow-up. What's the due date? It's the 8th of May. I also asked Claude to even estimate, like, roughly how long is it going to take me to do this thing? Just because sometimes it helps to literally open up the to-do and be like, oh, come on, this is a 5-minute task. Let's just sit down and do it. Versus other times like, okay, this realistically will take 2 hours, so I need to find a 2-hour block for it to happen. But I want to show you, I did not write this whole task, right? Partly because, like I said, I asked Claude to generate some dummy notes, but I never write any of these tasks, right? Any of these notes. I never type 8th of May. I never type 15 minutes. I never like populate any of this. Claude does it. How does it do it? Sometimes I open a terminal window, the way you talk to Claude in a chat, and I say, oh, give me this to do. But actually, most of the time, it's not that. It's either it'll read it off a meeting transcript because Granola and there's an Obsidian extension that just takes every Granola transcript and automatically puts it here without using any AI tokens. It just happens automatically like 2 minutes after every meeting finishes. So that's the first way. And the second way is what's called the daily note, right? So here in this folder called inbox, basically I open a new daily note every day. It's part of how Obsidian works. It automatically gets named with the date. And then here, often I just open up Whisper. Sometimes I'll type, but more often than not, I just use Wisprflow to and do a live demo here. I press the language button twice, and then I start talking and I say, oh, by the way, remind me also tomorrow that I need to, after the dentist, go buy a birthday present for my friend Maria. And so as I've rambled a bit, it's added this here. And because the way I described the sentence, actually Whisper knew to put quotation marks around it because I started saying, oh, I'm talking, and then I say this thing. Whisper also knows to put things like bullet points, make a numbered list. It learns my kind of custom vocabulary on its own, because for a lot of clients, there's like acronyms that only that client uses or specific names. It basically means it's a very easy way for me to have a stream of consciousness thought dump. Let's say if I have 2 minutes in between calls or if I go on a walk, to very quickly capture all of that context, not just write a bullet point that if I look at it 3 days later, it'll say birthday present Maria. And maybe you're like, okay, this is obvious enough. I will know what that means because I only have one Maria with a birthday coming up. But if it's a task like math feedback number 5, a week later, what does that mean? I do not remember. Or maybe this is, oh, I wrote out the full version in a piece of paper next to my desk, right? So by using your voice, you can dump so much more content. And so I basically give Claude a lot more input. But you might be thinking, no, Nick, this is just a text file. What do you mean you give it to Claude? Claude sits on top of this same vault every time I start it. So if I need to open a window without showing you the other ones. So I literally, my working directory is already Vault v4. If it wasn't, I just type Vault v4, and then I type Claude, and now we've started a new instance of Claude right, that sits on top of this. And so I've got a command called process autopilot. Then when I press enter, I'm not going to do it now, and it's not going to read off this demo data anyway. But basically, there's a set of commands Claude has as part of that slash command that says, go read today's daily note. If we've not done this processing in a while, go read every other daily note from previous days. And off the back of that, do whatever it is we need to do, right? So for example, here, let's see, there's this, let me move this. In my made up stream of consciousness, I was like, oh, I also bumped into Tristan Walker at the data product meetup. Here's who he is. We swapped LinkedIn details, and I told him I'd send him the community link plus some calendar slots, right? And that's how Claude knew to say, okay, we need to send this email and some calendar slots, right? And actually, not only did Claude create this task, but actually it also, where is it? Oh no, I didn't make this example. I was going to say one of the instructions I've given Claude is if there's a task that I'm supposed to do that you can get started on, just go and do it. So I don't think, yeah, it hasn't done this one, but basically for something like this, normally Claude would have actually drafted an email. If it knows enough information about the person, if it knows their email, it would have said, here's their email. So then I can just open the note, copy it into Gmail, and send it off. Now, could it also populate a draft directly into my Gmail for me to send? It could, but I'm very intentional about where to draw the line in terms of what is Claude's job versus what's my job. And for something like writing an email to a prospective customer, I'm like, I'm going to copy what you've written, but I'm going to review it. I'm going to make sure it makes sense, and then I'll hit send. I do not want to automate that because the cost of getting it wrong is much higher than the extra time it takes for me. But it might be that in other cases, you might say, yeah, I don't care about reading the email. I'm happy to automate it. Those are just the permissions I've given to Claude, right? Other times, it might not be a task like here. It might be more of a reflection, right? Like a journal entry, right? And so again, this is made up, but Claude's basically simulated it based on similar things or comparable things I may have said, where I was like, oh, I've been really turning this over in my head since I had this conversation with Meridian about phase 2. If I hold the line on price, the deal closes anyway. So maybe there's something different I need to think about in terms of my pricing and my pricing philosophy, right? So Claude's going to take that information, and if there's an existing note in my journal folder about pricing philosophy, it's going to update it, or it'll be like, oh, I need to create a new journal note about our strategy, or more, it might be like a personal note, right? It's going to go, here's my current position when it comes to pricing. Again, all of this is made up, but actually looking at it, it's similar to some real thoughts I have about my own pricing. These are some questions that I'm still pondering. And also, this is like older versions of this thinking, right? And the change log about what this looks like. And this really helps because often I think a little bit about, let's say, an aspect of my go-to-market strategy, then I get busy, then I'm coming back to it. It helps to have almost like a personal Wikipedia where these things get to accumulate, but also where I don't need to rewrite my Wikipedia article every time. I just trust Claude to do it. Which for me, just like with Wikipedia, where less than 1% of users make 99% of the content that you see on Wikipedia, it became the same with my personal vault, except there's only one of me. So when I don't feel like updating my notes, they just don't get updated, or they didn't get updated in the pre-Claude days. The other thing I want to show you, and implicitly I've demoed it, but I want to call it out, is you'll see, because I'm using Obsidian a lot of the time to write my instructions and my commands for Claude in the form of this, oops, how do I get this to move? In terms of this daily note with my stream of consciousness, that's partly because I don't want to be having real-time conversations with Claude a lot of the time, right? So for example, when I'm on the move and I don't have my laptop running, it's in my backpack, but I still have some thoughts I want to put down, I open the same page on my phone, I use Wisprflow to just dump those thoughts out, right? And then I know that I don't need Claude to answer right this instant, right? Claude can answer later, right? Because right now, anyway, even if Claude were to answer, I don't have time to go through it. And I found it really beneficial to have this asynchronous way of communicating. And it works both ways. Either I can have an asynchronous way of inputting into Claude, which is what this daily note is, But it also works the other way around, where maybe I'm using the terminal and I'm giving Claude in real time my inputs, my instructions of what I want, but I don't want it to come back with an immediate output, right? I don't want to do what I was doing here, where I've pasted an article and I'm like, hey, I want you to give me thoughts on this article, right? Because I might not have time right now to review this. And like I was sharing earlier at the start, I might even forget that this chat even existed. And actually, I do not remember. Oh no, this is for an article I've actually published, so maybe it's fine. I did it. Other times that conversation goes nowhere. No, instead, I tell Claude, hey, I want you to give me the output, but not in the chat. I want you to create a new file with it, right? So for example, over here, I think it's again based on this daily note. I just forgot where. Let's see. Yeah. So I was like, oh, I want to capture this quick win with the North Star engagement, blah, blah, blah. And then if maybe I asked Claude to also give me feedback on how that engagement went, right? And so it's created this note over here called coaching feedback on the conversation with Sarah Chen. What went well, what could go better. And actually, I've started doing this for most of my client meetings because I'm like, even if it's a thing I know I'm good at, there's always room to improve. And then also, there's some things where I'm like, I barely know what I'm doing. So I definitely need to get feedback, even if it's from an AI, on what went well and what could go better. And I've been very happy with the inputs I'm getting. But this is the kind of thing that, like, if Claude gives this to me straight after the meeting, where I'm about to go into a different meeting, I'm not going to want to read it. I'm not going to bother with it. It sits here in this folder. And when I have time, when I'm in the headspace to actually review stuff instead of throw things towards Claude, that's when I go and open this. Now, the real version of this review folder is massive. There's actually one of the challenges I've had ever since I've started doing this is I sometimes get a little bit too ambitious with how much I throw to Claude. And let's draft an article for this and let's draft a post for that. And I'm thinking of spinning up this new offering. Like, here's an initial outline, you flesh it out. It takes some discipline to then figure out, okay, maybe some of these ideas I don't actually need. Maybe, you know what? Maybe I'll skim through this coaching feedback, or I'll just go, I'm not going to bother with it.
Nick, got a
Yes,
question.
go for it.
How are you actually, what does it look like when you're using it? Do you have the terminal to the right and then Obsidian on one screen, or is it on your, like, how are you using it?
Yeah,
Someone did
yeah.
actually ask a question because they said, oh, I think I've missed how you're speaking to Claude at the same time as looking at the Obsidian. Or are you not doing that?
I do both. So let me show. Is it this one? So sometimes, yeah, exactly like you say, I might shape this window to be like this and Obsidian to be like that. That's how I used to do it. To be honest, these days I just alt tab. I'll have one moment where, to not show you the real windows, there's going to be like usually I do four windows like this, and then I'll just alt tab. So my whole screen is terminal, and then I'll switch to Obsidian, and then I'll go back to the terminal windows.
I'm just gonna screenshot that for a second, just for the madness. 1 second.
The other thing, this is like a very tactical thing, but I've really enjoyed doing it ever since I started, is color coding terminal windows in the way I'm just showing now. And these colors won't necessarily mean something to you now, but I might be like, okay, I have a client whose logo is a dark green. So when there's a terminal window that is a very dark green, I know this terminal window is for that client. And I have another one whose logo is a kind of blue. And then maybe for personal OS stuff, it's red. So it looks horrific anyway, but it's a bit easier when I switch and I'm like, okay, right now I need to focus on blue client, and I'll go here and I'll do stuff for blue client. I might ignore the other ones. You'll see down here, there's more terminal windows with different colors. I
Simon's also asked a question, but I'm pretty sure he said, "Where does Wisprflow? How are you deciding where Wisprflow puts the text?" But I'm assuming it's where the cursor is.
it's where the cursor is, right? So Wisprflow replaces the keyboard. So if I've clicked here and I don't know what this line that flashes is called. If it's here and I start typing, I type here. Similarly, if I start talking with Whisper, it puts the text there, right? Whisper is a keyboard replacement. It's not smarter than that, and I don't want it to be smarter than that in that sense. I want to show a couple more things and then I'll stop sharing my screen and actually see everyone's faces and questions because I see there's chat messages coming through, but I can't read them. I want to show two more things. So the first is I've accidentally created a CRM, right? Which is just a collection of notes, right? So it's a folder called people, a folder called companies, a folder called opportunities. Like any CRM has those three views, right? And Claude knows to go and update them, right? So if anytime I mention or I have a call with Daniel Okonkwo, it adds to the context it's learned about Daniel based on the transcripts or things I say in my daily note, and it keeps a log of recent interactions. Similarly, if we're discussing this 12K project with the made-up company called Meridian, again, it keeps it up to date. Now you might think, why is that important? Why does it matter? It matters because it lets Claude understand the context of the work I'm doing, right? Not just that there are tasks, but how do they relate to different opportunities? For it to know what are the things we need to do today. I've told it, hey, anytime it's a sales opportunity related thing, it's high priority. I want it to be in this daily brief note that you write for me every morning as a top priority thing. I need to send this proposal to Sarah because she wants it by Friday. And then the last thing I want to show is there's a folder called projects where, actually before that, there is a file, which actually I just realized there is no fake version of this file, but anytime you start a Claude project, Claude creates a node called claude.md. Right, so I'll show you the real version. It's over here, right? This basically every time I start up Claude, same as how you have custom instructions on ChatGPT, this is what Claude reads first things first, right? Every time it starts, it learns who is Nick, what does he do, how do I like to work with me, what kind of style. I'm going to skip through some of this. It shows the vault structure, right? So it gives the table of contents of, hey, what's inside this folder, right? Because Claude does not read every single note in this vault, right? Because then you would fill up the whole context window and it would be super slow and it would hallucinate and give you garbage answers. No, it reads the contents and then it knows if I mention a specific client and a specific project I'm doing for that client, it's going to know to go into the projects folder. So if I'm mentioning the North Star Mutual project, it's going to go here and read a project level Claude instruction. Right? It's a Claude.md file specific for North Star. It says who is the client, who's the sponsor, what are the dates, what's the value, what is the project about, who are the stakeholders, which means that, like, and for me, like, genuinely, so many times I will start a new Claude window from scratch and I'll just say, hey, I just got off the call with Bob for the North Star project, and he's given me some feedback that you can find in the transcript about how we should update the requirements because there are some changes that he wanted to make, right? And that's all I will say to Claude, and it's going to know exactly who's Bob, what project are we talking about, what is a PRD, how do I need to update the PRD, and it's going to go here, and previously we had version 0.2, now it's going to write version 0.3. Why? Because all of these changes happened off the back of that call, right? And it's a fake example, but it's exactly how I'm working on client projects now, where we'll get a bunch of feedback on how we should change what we're building for the client. In the old world, I would have had to take notes or at least ask Copilot to create me a summary of the agreed actions and changes, and then go and update the requirements document. And these requirements documents, this one is fake, so it's very short. My real one is 70 pages long because we need to capture every little part of what we're building. And of those 70 pages, I would have had to go and make updates to 30 different pages in 30 different sections, which, besides the fact that it needs a crazy amount of attention to detail to make sure you got all of it, very easy to make mistakes, or very easy for it to take hours and hours to make sure it's all comprehensive. And at least for me, I would go insane having to do those changes all by hand, right? And it's been amazing how, first of all, Claude doesn't accidentally include information about Meridian in my North Star Mutual stuff because it knows that Meridian is a different project. There's a different Claude.md file. It's not going to go and read the Meridian project if we're not talking about Meridian. It's going to stick to North Star. And it also means that then things like understanding what are my to-dos, where are we at, it has that full picture over here, the real version of this. Hey, remember, we've got the Happy Operators webinar today. And yesterday you said you hadn't, I don't know, prepared a new version of the demo. Do you want me to do that now? Or it may even say, I've done it for you. And that's all because it knows what's going on. It doesn't just work on different projects like the Claude that I was showing here. It actually knows the interrelation between the two. I think that's more or less it in terms of oh, there was one more thing I wanted to show actually. So at some point, I really liked how I didn't need to use Notion anymore as a CRM. It was just notes over here. But then I was like, you know what? I actually miss having that Kanban view of a CRM. And I was like, hey, Claude, can you vibe code me a CRM? And so this is what I'll show you now. It is a localhost application, right? So it only runs when my laptop is switched on, which is fine because it's just me and I don't want it to be on the cloud. As you can see, demo mode is switched on. So everything you're seeing here is similarly made up. And for me, this was great because this is just a visualization of all the markdown nodes you were seeing before. So it's not that there's special data in the back end of this CRM. It just shows what's there. And I won't do it now because it'll show the real data. But if I click on one of these, it shows me the contents of the markdown node and I can edit it here if I want to. But the reason I really like this is not because of this view, right? Because this is just the CRM. You can use the free version of a million different CRMs. It's that one, the CRM gets updated automatically by Claude. And two, that sales opportunities are only some of the relationships I need to manage. I also need to keep track, and I'll show you the real version of this one. I'm doing lots of webinars, same as Matt is doing for the community. When I was doing one a month, it was easy to remember who do I need to invite? Have we created the event yet? But in April, we had 5. And it was so hard to keep track of everything. So I've outsourced it to Claude, right? Claude keeps track of which ones do we have dates for, which ones are live versus just confirmed. So for example, for the Andy Sutton webinar, actually, we've confirmed the date with Andy, but I've not created the event yet. We don't have a title yet. We're getting close. I need to go and chase him and get that sorted. I've promised to write articles for people. There's talks I need to give that I need to prepare for or that I've applied to speak to, sponsors for my community, perks I've agreed to get from different sponsors on behalf of the community and so on. All of these things individually were not that big to remember, but when there's a million things happening, this is super, super valuable. And over time, you'll see here, I've got a bunch of other now internal tools because where previously I would just create a Google Sheet to keep track of things or to plan stuff or organize my company finances. Now I just ask Claude to vibe code me something. And then we iterate on it, right? This CRM took a little bit of iteration when I was like, ooh, let's add another tab for webinar speakers. Let's add another tab for something else. But it wasn't that much work and it's been happening very iteratively. So I'll shut up here. I guess I can scroll through, or Matt, do you want to
I mean,
pick
I was trying to,
questions?
yeah, I was keeping you relatively abreast, but there's not loads actually, but I think there's probably more coming. Simon's holding himself back, I think. But one was about the ADHD actually from Andrew. You told Claude you had ADHD. Did that affect, have you worked out if that actually affects things like the behavior or not, or is it just a context?
You know what? It's one of those things like I did that on day one of setting it up. So I think one of the things was I was getting very verbose answers initially. And I was like, look, instead of you giving me like a bunch of questions in the chat, can we just do it that you're giving me like one thing at a time, or that we keep it a little bit more concise? Honestly, I couldn't tell you if I were to re-edit the claude.md file now and remove that, how much of a difference it would make.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, it's hard to know. Nicholas, I don't know if you want to just ask the question yourself. It was about automating the triggers if you're there.
Yeah, I
But if
saw
you're
it.
not there, yeah. So,
I can talk about it.
yeah,
So
you talk about it. Yeah,
some,
he's in the library.
yeah, some stuff is automatic, right? So in my claude.md file, for example, if I go back to sharing, there's some notes around one example, like file naming conventions. I don't need to tell it to rename my transcripts to follow a particular convention. Or I've told it, here's how I want you to name files that sit in this for review folder. One that's very important is CRM linking, right? So you see here, in these fake CRM entries, there's these hyperlinks. Now in Obsidian, you can hyperlink to anything if you just use double square brackets. So what that means is if I write double square brackets China, it's going to link to a file called China. Now, in this case, there's no file called China in my Obsidian Vault, so it's a little bit grayed out compared to this one, but it remembers. So if in the future I create that node, it's going to know to link those two together, which is really, it's useful for me when I'm browsing here, right? And I can open this, and then I can scroll down and be like, oh, let's click on Olivia Marsh and go and look at this here, but also really helps Claude actually understand the relationship between different things. So I told Claude, hey, anytime I mention a person, a company, or an opportunity, you should use these bi-directional links to make sure that they occur, right? Which means that if we show the graphical representation of all these nodes, it looks like that, where each dot is a node and the lines between them are the links that I was showing. I'm slightly afraid of actually showing what these are because this is the real Vault, not just the demo version of it. There's some other automations, which honestly, half the time, I don't even know what they are, right? So one example that I sent in the Happy Operators WhatsApp group from a few days ago was that it wasn't even in the final. I scrolled up in the terminal chat and I saw that at some point, Claude had to rename the name of a stakeholder from a made up name to a real one. And I asked it, I was like, hey, what's happened there? And actually, I can just go and find the screenshot that I sent to you guys. Actually, there's probably too many things being sent in the WhatsApp group. But I basically asked it like, hey, how did we even get to that made up surname of someone? And it was like, you know what, you're right. Here's what happened. First, there we go. I can share my screen and show you. Right, so I saw this, right? And I was like, who the hell is Matt Hatchwell? And then I asked it, and it was like, honestly, I made those surnames up because you had initially only given me first names. And so I caught it immediately after I wrote the file. But then actually, because there was a rule in my global Claude.md saying never attribute a job title, company, or other details to a person without checking if they exist in the CRM. Right. And the reason why that node exists is because in the earlier days, it was making names up. And I just keep asking Claude, I was like, hey, how can we avoid this from happening in the future? A very like, I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed kind of approach. And so Claude proposes something. And half the time, I'm like, I don't even care what you've proposed. Is it a hook that you're adding? Is it another part to your prompt? But it just works. Right? So here it went, hey, the right thing would have been for me to check the CRM first and then a self-correct after if needed. Right? So that was the one time that kind of hallucination happened anyway. It doesn't usually occur, but it hasn't happened at all since. And so I've even created a custom slash command that I use before closing a chat that it's longer than what I'm about to say. But the short version of it is, it basically says, hey, is there anything from this current session that you've learned that's worth going to update the Claude.md file with, or to go and update your memory files with? And I've told it, because I want to be in control, it doesn't go and make the update. Instead, it proposes the updates and it goes, okay, I think I should update this memory and this Claude.md file. And sometimes I look at it and it might be too specific. It might be that we were discussing something super specific to one client and it's going to try and make a global rule out of it. And I'm like, no, this should be a project level rule, or maybe this is so niche that I don't even want it recorded over here. But it's how it's become a self-improving system. There's a human in the loop still, but actually for a lot of this stuff, I'm like, I'm treating it as a bit of a black box. I'm a product manager. I'm very used to working like that with developers, where sometimes I'm like, hey, I need to understand how this algorithm works because I need to know if it works in the way we intended to for our client. And other times where I'm like, to my engineers, I'm like, you guys figure it out. Whatever you need to do to optimize how we use storage space, you just do it. And I trust you that it's going to work. And if then it doesn't work, I'm going to come back and be angry and be like, not angry, but I'd be like, hey, Claude, I thought you fixed this. Why isn't it fixed? But that happens infrequently, right? Most of the time, when we identify an issue and then I ask it, hey, how can we avoid this issue from happening again? It either has a single proposal, or maybe it'll be like, we can do it like this or like that. And I might say, what about this third option? but it does not require a deeply technical understanding of the inner workings most of the time. It's more about conceptually, how should this work? And that kind of works.
Another question around memory, because you have Claude's own memory, and then you have this kind of memory system, which I think is partly what it is.
Yeah.
Are they competing? Do they seem to work and you're not really concerned about it?
A bit of A and a bit of B, honestly. Like when I first started doing this, Claude's memory was much worse or Claude Code's memory feature wasn't as sophisticated, but I see it as slightly different, right? So memory is a kind of global thing. It's not going to be project specific, client specific, workflow specific. Whereas having a Claude.md inside I've got like a folder called content, and inside content, there's a folder called Substack for my articles. There's a Claude.md file under Substack that here's rules that only relate to Substack, right? It doesn't relate to all content. It doesn't relate to every other project. For me, like Claude's memory is basically limited to the first 200 lines, right? When Claude starts up, it only reads the first 200 lines. That means that if you just let it do its own thing with memory, it's very easy for it to fill up with junk, right? Like I remember like when I was looking at my ChatGPT memory back when I was using chatgpt.com, it it didn't remember a bunch of important things, but it remembered random bullshit. Like one day I looked up the symptoms of my friend's dog, and so ChatGPT had written, "Oh, Nick has a dog of this breed," and I was like, "No, I don't. What? I didn't. What made you think that?" So it's useful in that sense to be aware of what's in your global memory layer. And so there have
Mm.
been only a couple times, I don't have to do this all the time, but I'm like, hey, can you go through what's in memory and see if there's stuff that we can trim? And it comes back and it's, oh, I think we can remove these three things. And I look at him like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Simon, to your question, honestly, it is very hard to say, like, what is the percent productivity improvement for two reasons. The first is I don't do detailed time tracking, and that takes more time than the value it would give me. But the other thing is it's improved the quality of my work. And that is a thing that I can definitely point to, right? There's a lot of stuff that I could have gotten it to 90% quality, but it would have not been worth the amount of effort it would have taken. Whereas now, because Claude does the grunt work, I'm like, great, now I can really focus on where I can add more value, which is not maybe in preparing 70 pages of bland requirements, but on focusing on very specific things where the detail is going to matter. So, but roughly speaking, I think if I think about it in the terms I really care about, probably would have made about 30% less revenue, which is a combination of productivity and quality of output. And I would have had to work a lot more, like more hours, be more stressed, work more weekends than the amount I did. I don't know. Is that 50% productivity improvement, 60%, 100%? I don't know. I don't have a boss I need to report these numbers to. So even though a lot of the work I do actually for my clients is helping them identify those productivity savings numbers, I don't have to do it for myself. What did I do before this? It's one of those things, just like how we reminisce and we're like, my God, can you remember what the world was like before we had Google? Or how did our parents study without Wikipedia and Google? It honestly, it feels a little bit like that, right? I'm like, how did I work without, and it's both Whisper and Claude Code, right? And the answer was the quality of the work was often not as high, right? Because in business, very often, good enough is good enough. You're like, I'll get it to 70 or 80%, and that's about it. But also, you take on less work and maybe you work longer hours. I've had many days of long hours, but the amount of stuff that I got through in those hours was incomparable. I'm talking, and maybe here the productivity figure I gave earlier doesn't make sense. I'm like, now I can wrap up a long workshop and prepare all the post workshop stuff that would have been like several days of work, and it would have taken a week to do because you don't have uninterrupted time. And now it happens in an afternoon, or half of it happens in one afternoon, the other in another half. So, yeah, Andrew, I don't know what I did before this. I can't understand how the old me was okay with it. And that's the Claude raising the bar. Are there any other questions from
Yeah, one
people that
above.
I've not?
Can you input previous meetings and notes around clients? So it actually wants to go from ChatGPT to
Yeah.
this.
So I can't demo it because I've uninstalled Codex, but basically you can take a different model, right? You can go from Claude Code to Codex and they work the same way, right? So you just point them to a folder, and then instead of Claude, meaning Claude Code, Codex is the ChatGPT version of Claude Code. It can work off the same set of folders, the same nodes. I think there might be some minor renaming you need to do because you need to tell Codex, hey, instead of agents.md, my notes are called claude.md. And now, if you've got meeting notes, for example, that are not in your folder structure already, you have to do that either manually and painfully, or there's ways around it. So for example, I imported all of my Otter transcripts because I used to use Otter through the Otter MCP. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, it's also one of those things where you can just tell Claude, hey, I'm using this note taker. How can we import everything? It was very token hungry. So actually, I couldn't do it in one go. I did it. It worked for a couple hours. It imported a bunch of meetings. Then we had to wait for my token limit to renew, and then did some more overnight. Then the next day did some more. There's a lot of things that, like, when you're setting up, you may need to do some stuff in bulk. Whereas now it processes every meeting as it comes in, or at least it processes my meetings for the day that day. In terms of cost and consumption, it's manageable.
I asked a question about what plan do you need to be on to get this running?
Yeah.
To
So
set it up is one, but then also just to have it running.
when I started, I was on the 20 euros or 18 euros a month plan, and it was fine. Sometimes I'd hit my limit and I'd be like, time to take a break and I'll come back in 2 hours. Then Anthropic nerfed the limits, and that made me go to 90 euros a month. But actually, now that the news came out that they've doubled the limits again, I just downgraded my subscription. I'm back to, like, in 2 days when my plan renews, I'll be back to the cheap plan, and I'll figure out if that's enough. My idea is to use the 18 euros a month plan plus extra usage, right? So I'm like, if I pay 20 euros a month plus another 20 of extra usage, that's still cheaper than 90. But honestly, even the 90, it's so worth it. Now, it's especially worth it for me because I work for myself, right? So I, as a business, spend this money, and I, as a business, make more money as a result. Oh, yeah. And I should have actually said this before people started dropping out. So if you want to copy this, what I've done, and I need to update it since the last version, but I've basically made a starter prompt, right? And I've put it on GitHub. So it's here, and basically you take this and you just Control A, Control C, paste it into a blank Claude Code session. And what it'll do is it'll create the basic structure. And then at the end, I go, hey, go and interview the user, right? Starting with basic stuff like what's your name, what do you do, what are your goals? And I want to upgrade this from version 0.5 to 0.6 because I've made some improvements since this version that I want reflected. So actually, one of the terminal chats to over here was me discussing with Claude, hey, I want to release a new version. What should we do? And we've iterated on it a bit. I'm going to push the changes later today with a few more questions, like a few more onboarding steps. Because basically, it wouldn't make sense for you to just copy paste what I have, right? Because so much of what I've built, it's built to work for me. But yeah, Matt, is it okay if I send you the link a little bit?
Yeah,
And I can
I'll follow up with a blast on the Luma anyway, but
like
I'll put it on the YouTube and other
yeah.
places.
I've pasted the link below. I'm just saying I've got a slightly newer version that I think is better coming out. But honestly, this one is good. And if you're really in a rush, you want to give it a try, you can use it there. There's the starter prompt. There's the README. That's a bit of the article version of what we just went through. And maybe one last thing to show you guys is I've called it the origin story. So I told Claude, hey, can you go and analyze our chat logs and strip out sensitive details so if someone is really curious, they can see, like, how did this emerge organically? Because honestly, 3 weeks later, I didn't remember what were the prompts I typed to make this work the way it does. right? So I've asked it to literally get verbatim quotes of what I was telling Claude and how we made the upgrades. And you can read this yourself, honestly, you can start your own with a starter prompt and then show it this origin story and be like, hey, based on this, what can we do? Very often I'll find something interesting, an interesting article, tweet, GitHub project. I'll give it to Claude and be like, hey, based on this, do you think there's something we can learn to improve this whole operating system? And most of the time it gives a good answer. To
Have you got any?
Chloe,
Oh yeah, here we go.
sorry, Chloe, super quick answer. Basically, there's an Obsidian plugin for Granola. So Obsidian has what's called plugins. They're like extensions built by enthusiasts, right? So I go here, community plugins. I've installed it. It's called Granola Sync, and it just automatically creates markdown notes like I'll show you the demo version, right? There's a folder called Meetings Granola. Actually, here I had just asked Claude to give me an excerpt, but I get the full transcript loaded here. It's not a Claude thing, it's an Obsidian thing. But then Claude knows over here somewhere, there's a note called meeting notes, and I tell it, or it's in one of these other context files. So Claude knows where to find my transcripts. I don't need to tell it every time, hey, there's a transcript called blah, 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 go and read it. It knows that, oh, it's from today, it's with this person. There's metadata saying who are the people that were in the meeting. And so it goes and finds it.
Amazing. All right, look, we're 1 minute to go until the end of the hour. Nick, honestly, I'm amazed. I've seen that once, but to see it again is pretty incredible. And I
It's been
feel
super
like
fun.
you're a happier man because of it. And
So
I think
much.
everyone else is. I'm going to stop recording so I can.